Hi people, and hello my Chili Con Carnage crew, it's Chili here from Live Listen Race, bringing you a bit of a controversial take, and this is going to be on the record Smells Like Children by Marilyn Manson, which, by the way, is not an EP. It is an LP, and I will discuss in this video why this is the case. And yes, Hades66, this video is in regards to your query that you left on my video for Marilyn Manson's albums ranked from worst to best, in which he goes on to say, "Jesus mate, are you even a fan? Bloody hell, what a terrible list for the most part. You had a crack though, and each to their own." By the way, Smells Like Children is an EP, not an LP. So I think for most people out there, we have to come to the definition of what an EP is versus what an LP is. So let's get started by figuring out what the difference is between an EP and an LP. So EP and LP, and why did these terms come about? Well, basically this all relates back to the vinyl days, in which we had physical media that was restricted to space and sizes. These vinyl records were restricted in the way that they were either 7-inch, 10-inch, or 12 inches in diameter. And of course this would restrict the amount of music that was allowed on a record. Now this could be countered by also reducing the RPM at which a vinyl would play at, whether it was 33 or 45. But to put it bluntly, the faster the record would spin, the better the sound quality was. So what is an EP and what is an LP? An EP is an extended play, meanwhile an LP is a long play, and it would basically set apart what an album was. An EP typically would be made up of something between 4 to 6 songs and would only be 20 minutes in duration, and that would be both sides of the vinyl. However, the long plays, or LPs for short, would contain any number of tracks and also be longer than 20 minutes. The physical restriction would be roughly 45 minutes for a typical vinyl length. The typical restrictions for a normal vinyl record would be about 45 minutes, including both sides of the record. This is why we see most albums from the 70s or earlier being restricted to less than 45 minutes in runtime. And we're not going to include singles because that's irrelevant for this matter. So now you know the definition of an EP versus an LP, let's look at some examples from say the 70s and earlier in regards to some famous records. Good examples to show you in regards to EPs and LPs would be of course through artists such as Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, or of course David Bowie. So Elvis Presley during his lifetime released several EPs and several albums of course. He released something like 29 EPs versus 24 studio records. The Rolling Stones for example only released a couple of EPs during their time, and they have for example 5x5, which was a EP released in 1964 that contained of course 5 tracks. You can consider the amount of albums that they have released around about this time as well, with the Rolling Stones number 1 and number 2 each containing roughly 10 to 12 tracks on those records. David Bowie would be another example when he released a few EPs in the 80s such as Don't Be Fooled by the Name, and this once again only had limited amount of tracks that would make up the criteria of what an EP is versus what his albums would contain. Now we go over to the Beatles, who probably perfected EPs versus LPs, in which they released 36 EPs during their time versus the 12 UK studio albums, or 17 US if you want to get technical, and they have many EPs such as of course Beatles for Sale number 2, the Beatles Million Sellers, the list just goes on obviously. And if you compare this to say for example their studio albums which contain more tracks and obviously longer run times, you can see the widening gap as to what the definition is between these two records. And this trend would also continue into the 80s, with many punk rock groups usually releasing EPs as opposed to LPs because that's how they preferred it. And examples of that could be for example with Minor Threat, Black Flag, Circle Jerks, or No Effects. Now with the advent of modern technology, we have a bit of a blurring of the lines, because obviously EPs and LPs were made during a time when vinyl was the rage and was restricted of course to the physical capabilities of that media. However, with tapes and of course the invention of compact discs, aka CDs, this limitation was no longer an issue. So we have a very blurred line when we are walking forward into this technology, as CDs obviously contained more space to contain their music, typically up to 79 minutes, and this was regardless of whether or not this CD of course was an EP or an LP. It could be either way, couldn't it? However, a CD was always one side, so regardless of whether or not it was an EP or an LP, they would both be on the same size disc. It would just contain less music. So this is where the line starts to blur in regards to the modern advent of technology. And it is at this point I must define the new criteria for what makes up an EP versus an LP, in particular regarding to the CD era of music. When we go into the realm of CD era music and EPs versus LPs, basically an EP in compact disc era would be between 4 to 8 tracks and 40 minutes in runtime. Meanwhile, an LP would contain at least one track, and on top of that would also be up to 79 minutes in duration. There are perfect examples during the compact disc era of what an EP can actually be made up of. Some perfect example of what an EP is during the compact disc era can be found with Alice in Chains, in particular the records Sap and Jar of Flies. Both of these records are EPs, and by definition they fit the criteria of what an EP is made up in the modern compact disc era. Both of these records are either between 4 to 8 tracks in length and under 40 minutes in duration, so they meet the tick of approval for both of these criteria and are considered EPs. However, Smells Like Children does not fit this criteria. As we can see on the track list here, Smells Like Children contains 16 tracks on this record and a runtime of at least 50 minutes in length, depending on which version you get. So by both the number of tracks found on this album and also the duration of it, it doesn't fit the criteria for what an EP is. Another good example for this is Dream Theater's record A Change of Seasons, which the band considers to be an EP as opposed to, of course, a new album. And even at first glance, when you're looking over this record, you can see it is only 5 tracks on this album, so it does meet half the criteria of what is needed for an EP. However, when you see the duration of this record with a runtime of 57 minutes, clearly it doesn't fit that criteria, so by all means and purposes, it is a LP, or an album. Now some people might point out and say that these are live recordings that are on the record, it is just one new song and 4 covers. And I want to point out that there is no criteria for what is contained on the record, but rather the amount of tracks and the duration itself. These are the only 2 criteria, and that is the most important. So regardless that there is only 1 new track and 4 live tracks, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day, it isn't going to constitute what is made up of an EP. And I think this is a really good example to show, because it was another record that was released in the same year as Smells Like Children, and is another record that runs over the runtime as well. And of course I believe that both of the artists consider this to be an EP. And I think this is where the misconception lies, because while an artist might consider this to be an EP because it wasn't a brand new record and didn't contain everything that was a new track, it is not. By all intents and purposes, it is not an EP. Now I am unsure as to the source of what Hades66 is referring to this record being an EP to. Maybe he's referring to the Wikipedia entry, which does say that it is an EP. However, of course, Wikipedia is not a valuable source of information, and of course Wikipedia has been very wrong in the past. To further my point, you can also visit Apple Music and Spotify, with both of these platforms listing this record as an album. If you were to go over to Spotify or Apple Music and click on albums only for the artist, then you would find Smells Like Children in this catalogue. However, I am aware this is not the most refutable source when it comes to music and of course categories, because at the end of the day, both of these platforms have got information wrong several times in the past, and just from personal experience, I know that both of these platforms have got it wrong in the past. For example, Korn's album Untouchables is considered a compilation record when we know this is not the fact. Also, A Jar of Flies is considered an album too on Spotify. But what I can offer instead is some solid evidence provided by the RIAA. Now the RIAA, or Record Industry Association of America, are the people who are in charge of handing out those lovely gold and platinum records at the end of the day to artists who have sold over 1 million records or whatever number it is. So they have a very good understanding as to what category these albums sit in. And lucky for us, Marilyn Manson's record Smells Like Children did go platinum, selling over 1 million records. So let's see what the RIAA classify this record as. Ah yes, as you can see here, the RIAA classify this platinum record as an album. So just to confirm that I am right, let's check on, for example, Alice in Chains' albums Sap and Jar of Flies and see what the RIAA classified these records as. So as you can see on screen now, they are considered short form albums, in other words, EPs. So ultimately, where does this leave us? Well, by the definition of what an EP versus an LP is during the CD era, we can tell that Smells Like Children is not an EP. It is too long, it has too many tracks, and the RIAA even classified it as an album during their award. Now, it is regardless whether or not these tracks are sound effects between certain songs, or if they are remixes, because again, the content that is on the album is regardless. It is the amount of tracks and it is the duration of the record that constitute what makes up for an EP. Content found on the album is irrelevant. What is relevant is that at the end of the day, by all means and purposes, Smells Like Children is not an EP. It is a misconception that it is as such. This record is an album for all intents and purposes. And regardless if you want to continue calling it as such, just know that you are wrong. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But what about the why? Why did I put this in my list? Well, it was fun. It was a fun list that I just wanted to do of Marilyn Manson's albums ranked from worst to best, regardless of course of whether or not it is an EP or an LP. I didn't care, because for example, if you go over my channel and see my NoFX albums tier list, you're going to see NoFX EPs on that list as well. However, technically they are EPs because they meet the criteria. And if you jump across to my rankings of Dream Theater's albums ranked from worst to best, you're going to find a change of seasons on there. Regardless again, if the album considers it an EP, it is not. And you can bet that when I do my rankings of Alice in Chains, I am going to include, of course, Sap and A Jar of Flies. At the end of the day, you can continue calling it an EP, but you're just not correct in doing so. And I think I've made that abundantly clear throughout this video. So Hades, I hope you take this on board and know that I'm not less of a fan for calling Smells Like Children, of course, an album as opposed to an EP. That is my reasons. It's up to you whether or not you want to take it on board. It doesn't really matter, I guess, either way, does it? Anyway, Hades, I hope you take this as constructive criticism. This is not meant as an attack on you. And I hope one day in the future you enjoy my content. After all, we're all human, and I have made plenty of mistakes in my other videos, but this one time, I am right. Anyway, to the rest of you out there, I hope you have a great day and stay spicy. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.